So hello and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Salvador Munoz, and I'm the Director of Public Programs at Poster House, which is, of course, the first and only museum in the United States dedicated to the art and history of the poster. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's virtual program, AIDS Activist Graphics and Lesbian Visibility, a conversation between art historian Ksenia M. Soboleva and artist and Gran Fury core member Marlene McCarty. This insightful conversation will explore the ways in which lesbian identity was navigated and represented in Gran Fury's work, as well as McCarty's personal studio practice. Dr. Ksenia M. Soboleva is a New York-based writer and art historian specializing in queer art and culture. She holds a PhD from the Institute of Fine Arts at NYU with a dissertation on art, AIDS, and lesbian identity in the United States. Marlene McCarty is an artist, designer, and activist who lives and works in New York City. She was a member of the AIDS activist collective Gran Fury, a co-founder of the transdisciplinary design studio Bureau, and has exhibited globally as an artist since the 1990s. Before we get started, I want to share a few notes on accessibility for this event. Automated closed captioning is available for those who want or need it, and you can turn it on or off by clicking the CC button on the bottom of your screen. This program is being recorded and will be made available for all registered attendees after the event. And if you have any questions during the program, you can drop them in the chat or Q&A box at any time, and I will vocalize them for you during the Q&A portion at the end of the program. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to our presenters.
Hello.
Thank you so much. Hi. Hi, Marlene.
Hi.
Thank you so much. Thanks to Poster House for this invitation. I'm so grateful to be here with Marlene McCarty, my fellow Capricorn and an artist whose work I've admired and written about and continue to be in dialogue with for quite a few years now. I think we just established that we met in 2017, though it might be earlier. So since we are at Poster House virtually, and given my and Marlene's work, we wanted to focus on visual culture during the AIDS crisis. And, posters, of course, are a form of communication, of marketing, but also a tool for public engagement and political agenda. And, the urban fabrics of New York City, starting in the 1970s, were really saturated with posters and stickers and graffiti that included imagery by artists like Jenny Holzer and the Guerrilla Girls. And today we are very used to seeing these works in galleries and in museums, but initially they were not made as art. And for example, Jenny Holzer's inflammatory essays of the 1970s were printed on really cheap colored paper that the artist then plastered onto exterior walls around Soho. And it's really in the 1980s, with the rise of postmodernism and artists appropriating advertising strategies, that these works started to enter the art realm. There was an increased interest among feminist artists, in particular, in using language as a way of exposing the power structures that were inherent in representation. So artists such as, again, Jenny Holzer, but also Mary Kelly, and of course, Barbara Kruger, who you see here, who I'm sure everyone is familiar with. And Kruger took advertising as her source material and was building on her own professional background in the field. And she appropriated advertising's very seductive qualities to expose media as a tool of power and produce these sleek prints that always or often juxtaposed image and text. And it was Kruger who became particularly important to AIDS activist artist collectives, as during the AIDS crisis, the body had literally become a battleground. And AIDS activists often appropriated representational strategies used by others, as Douglas Crimp, who's a really critical art historian, said that stealing is part of the plan. If it works, we use it. And most prolific among these activist collectives was Gran Fury, often coined as the design branch of ACT UP, the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, and responsible for much of the graphic imagery that is now associated with the AIDS crisis. And Marlene, you were the only female member of Gran Fury. I know some people came and went, but you remained a core member for the duration of the collective. And can you talk a little bit about how you first became involved? I know that it was through the Let the Record Show project, of which we have a slide that follows in 1987.
Right. Yeah, I was not there the day Gran Fury was founded. Everything was really, really messy in those days, but ACT UP, the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, kind of coalesced at the center on 13th Street in 1987. After Larry Kramer gave a very impassioned speech, had the two-thirds of the room stand up and basically said, if you don't do anything in 5 years, this many people in this room are going to be dead. And of course, this was honestly a room primarily filled with white men who were used to a certain amount of privilege. And they became enraged by the fact that the government was doing nothing about this plague that was upon us. And so that's how ACT UP formed. They started having weekly meetings, which really grew into hundreds of people going, of which I was one, way back in the back, going oh my God, what's going on here? But long story short, Bill Olander came to this very unformed, wild group of ACT UP members and said, I would like to do a window at the new museum on the issue of AIDS. And so this very ad hoc group grew out of that unruly group at the center. And they created this installation called Let the Record Show. The reason I bring that up, well, one, it was the formation of Gran Fury, and two, that was where I was first brought into the group. I was friends with John Lindell, and had just met Donald Moffat. And they knew I had skills to make things. And basically they needed a lot of labor to make this installation. So they kind of wrote me into basically cutting all the letters. It's hard to tell in that image. Can you go to the next image? That's a little easier to see. But you can see all the text in the cement. That was all, each one of those letters was hand cut and then cast. So that was my job, cutting all those letters, hours upon hours. Anyway, to say, I participated in that project. They tried to rope me into more. I was like, no, too much work. No, 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 no. And then, what can I say? The world got worse. More people.
Well, I remember you telling me that it was, you know, you had like you had a job at a high-end design firm. You were really busy, but you felt such a sense of community at those meetings that you couldn't resist.
Oh my God, it was like, I mean, it was also that way at ACT UP, that the energy of the community at that point was so energizing. I just did an interview with somebody else in the last couple of weeks, and they were like, did you have a mentor? And I was like, no, I never had a mentor. I was like, but that energy to kind of keep pushing you forward, I totally got from Gran Fury and ACT UP and WHAM and WAC and just all of this communal work that was going on at that period. So my peers were essentially my mentors. Anyway, let's just say I eventually got roped in to doing more and more and started going to meetings week by week and really got active around the Kissing Doesn't Kill time, which I think is our next picture.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
This is an installation. Both those images, the last three very bad images you've seen, I just have to say, you're going to see a lot of really cruddy resolution. We lived our lives in low resolution and we were fine, but it looks kind of funky today. So just go with it.
It's part of. And for those who might not be familiar with this installation, it is basically a mural of the Nuremberg trials is juxtaposed with AIDS villains, so conservative politicians, and then you see the gravestones for which Marlene made a text, and then the Silence is Death logo triangle has of course become emblematic of AIDS activism, and at the time it had already been printed on T-shirts by the Silence is Death collective. Some of the members would then become Gran Fury, and I think the T-shirts were done a year prior to this installation, but it's really here in the window installation with the neon sign, the pink triangle, silence equals death, that it became so iconic.
Right. In fact, the new museum took that neon into their collection, which at that point in time, they didn't really have a collection. They would rotate work in and out of the museum, but I think they still have it, truthfully. Anyway.
And so at this point, they were on Broadway, yeah?
Oh, at this point, it was not the new museum that you guys are imagining. Yeah. It was like a funky church basement gallery.
Exactly.
It was crazy.
I didn't realize they still had it.
Yeah. Or they did a couple years ago, I'm assuming, unless they broke it.
Let's check.
Anyway, you can go to the next slide. So, yeah, the first big project that I really was there as a Gran Fury member was the Kissing Doesn't Kill. I just wanted to give you guys a little background about Gran Fury. We were actually a very, well, for those days, we were a diverse group of individuals. I don't necessarily mean racially. I was the only female. Robert Vasquez was the only person of color. The rest were white men. But we were not all artists. This is a common misconception. When I teach at schools and things, people will be like, could you give us tips on making a good art collective? And I'm like, I can't. I didn't ever make an art collective. We were all kinds of different people. We had a hairdresser, we had a set designer, we had an architect, we had a filmmaker, 2 graphic designers, performance artist. I mean, everybody was a little arty, okay. But we were all over the map. So also dozens of people had kind of been in and out of Gran Fury up to that point. A lot of names you guys would recognize. But people would come and go. And I think the problem got to be every week there was different people there, so nothing could ever get done. And then around the time I joined, it was a decision to just like, okay, give everybody the chance to come back, but they have to stay. And if they're not going to stay, they're out. So we, at that point, kind of became the same 11 people for the next 5 or 6 years. So as you can imagine, there were all kinds of different voices, which was interesting because we made decisions exclusively by consensus. So that means everybody in the group had to agree to whatever was being decided on, or you couldn't do it. So you can imagine that was a lot of like fighting, crying, getting mad and walking out the room, coming back. It was intense. We exclusively used the collective voice, which kind of empowered, I think it empowered us to speak more radically and with greater force than we would probably have done as individuals. And one of our main strategies was to sort of take what I call the voice of the master, but traditional sort of media strategies. And so we wanted to create something that people would look at and take seriously. I can tell you the AIDS quilt was not our favorite piece of AIDS activism, because we were really like, we want people to take this seriously, and not be like, oh, that's a cute art project, blah, blah, blah. So we would take, obviously for Kissing Doesn't Kill, we copied a Benetton ad, or the spirit of a Benetton ad, but loaded it with other content. I do want to say right here, it says Kissing Doesn't Kill, Greed and Indifference Do. This is the one version of the poster where the rejoinder is not there. The rejoinder reads, corporate greed, government inaction, and public indifference make AIDS a political crisis. This was a project done with Art Against AIDS on the road. It went to 7 cities, including it started in San Francisco in 1989. It went to Washington, Chicago, Houston, New York. I can't think of all of them. It was curated by AMFAR, American Foundation for AIDS Research, who basically asked tons of companies for donations to do this project. So they said to us, we can't have the phrase, let me read you the rejoinder. The rejoinder is corporate greed, government inaction, and public indifference make AIDS a political crisis. They were like, we can't say corporate greed on this poster. So it was this whole thing of like, are we going to step out of the project? Are we not going to do the project? Blah, blah, blah. Long story short, we decided it was better to do an abbreviated version of the project and send pictures of same-sex couples and interracial couples kissing all over America than it was to pull the project back because of the rejoinder. We did have them make, you can see a little bit of yellow square on the right side. They printed another yellow square. Those are 2 separate pieces of vinyl. They printed another square with the rejoinder on it, which we did use in other situations. But basically this poster was really trying to counter the misinformation about the presence. There was hysteria about the possible presence of HIV in saliva, and the threat
Rock
of,
Hudson.
Pardon?
Rock Hudson became
Well,
like a media.
Yeah, go ahead. Do you want to mention that?
Well, yeah, it was all over the newspapers, and people didn't know that he was queer, and all of a sudden, it was announced that Rock Hudson was HIV positive, and people were like, "Oh my God, somebody who we thought was one of us is a homosexual," and he had kissed this actress in a film that they were working on, and so there was a full-blown paranoia. And I think there was like a newspaper article in 88 or maybe 89, maybe it was 89. I know it was like, nobody's safe from AIDS.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then tabloids were also sensationalizing this risk of casual spread. So this was an attempt to quell that. And we just wanted to show it was safe to kiss and assert positive images of queer sexuality. You have to remember, I know it's really hard right now because things are very different, but at this point, gay marriage, domestic partnerships, gays in the military, none of that was even close to a political agenda. Today, with our kind of prime time ready homosexuals, it's easy to forget this really extreme and hateful language aimed at homosexuals in those days. Although I have to say, since 2016, it's probably coming back. We can move on. Oh, I guess we just have a few more Barbara Krugers here because basically Gran Fury decided we were going to rip off Barbara Kruger. So we went to her and we were like, Barbara, we love your work and we're going to rip you off. And she was like, fine, go ahead, have at it. So
how did you connect with her?
Well, actually, Tom Kalin, I think had her as a teacher or as a visiting artist when he was doing his MFA. And so he still had contact with her. So it was through Tom that this happened.
Right.
But you were talking about Douglas Crimp, like if you can steal it, it's fair game. You can change the slide.
The next one is
do you want to talk about these, Ksenia? Because you picked these.
I just think that in these, it just becomes so, it's these images in particular really show how, Gran Fury was informed by Barbara Kruger, but also in this case, we have something that Barbara Kruger actually made for visual aids, and a work that is addressing, how it was thought that women weren't at risk of HIV infection, and the CDC wouldn't even acknowledge it, and this is largely due to the fact that society was very much thinking in terms of risk groups instead of risk practices, right? So there are various ways for people to contract HIV, and a woman, or let's say somebody who identifies as a lesbian and perhaps only has sex with women, could still be an intravenous drug user, right? Like there are practices that anyone can engage in, and some lesbians have sex with men, and so it's so there was this very narrow-minded way of thinking about it.
I actually think there were sexual practices that the people in charge couldn't even imagine. So how were they even going to suggest sex? Practice.
Yeah. Well, lesbians don't have sex, right? It's
right.
Just a cuddle.
That's right. That's right. Like lesbian bed death. Okay, we can move on. I threw this one in here just because this idea of sort of seeing what's come behind you or contemporary to you and sort of borrowing aesthetic or borrowing ideas. This is basically a group of people rebuilding ACT UP 20 here in 2024. came to me and were sort of encouraging me to participate with them because they are kind of reworking some Gran Fury graphics for their own needs. I basically said to them what Barbara said to us. I was like, look, all our artwork, we'll call it artwork, it's not artwork, all our work is open source. You can go to our website and download anything you want. It's free. So I just told them to go for it. But I like this idea of generations kind of taking from each other, taking successful things from each other and twisting them in a new direction.
Yeah, the dialogue continues.
What'd you say?
I said the dialogue continues,
Yeah.
except on gap appropriate things for t-shirts.
Well,
We
okay.
could
Can we avoid that right now? You can change the slide.
All right, so yeah, let's talk about how Kissing Doesn't Kill was received in different
Okay, I'm going to
cities.
give you a little Chicago update because it was kind of interesting. Okay, so Kissing Doesn't Kill had been in Houston, Miami, Washington, I think Atlanta. It had been in all of these cities that may not have been at that point in time the most progressive cities in America. We're going to the north. We're going to Chicago. Okay. Same-sex couples kissing was so shocking and unacceptable that it led to court cases and censorship. One of the reasons we were censored from public, which I'll tell you about in a second, was the accusation of recruiting children. In spring 1990, Kissing Doesn't Kill was slated to run on buses and subways in Chicago. Alderman Robert Shaw complained the poster had nothing to do with a cure for AIDS. Chicago Transit Authority should not promote a particular lifestyle. And the colorful posters were for the purposes of recruitment of children. In June 1990, the Illinois Senate barred the Chicago Transit Authority from displaying any poster showing or simulating physical contact or embrace in a homosexual or lesbian context where persons under 21 could view it. This was called the No Embrace Bill. The ACLU got involved and went to work on our behalf, protesting the bill as unconstitutional. Okay, so we had been completely banned from the public. But it was Gay Pride Day in Chicago. Can you go to the next slide? The marchers marched defiantly with the Kissing Doesn't Kill banner. Actually, those two pictures are reversed, but you're just gonna have to go with it. They marched defiantly with this banner up after it was already had been said it couldn't be seen in public. And then they organized a giant kiss-in outside the CTA. Now, for anyone who doesn't know what a kiss-in is, I think ACT UP did their first one in 1988. But basically, it was just, sometimes they were really organized, like people sitting almost at kissing booths, and they would just kiss anybody who came up. Sometimes they were really rowdy and with huge hundreds of people just kissing each other. So they organized one of these kiss-ins. And in the meantime, the ACLU was just plugging along. Finally, due to their work, the Illinois House of Representatives defeated the No Physical Embrace bill. And in August 1990, Kissing Doesn't Kill was belatedly installed on buses. Outraged Chicagoans, rumored to have been organized by conservative religious ministers, defaced nearly all the posters within 2 days. That was the previous photo you just saw. So yeah, the idea of censorship, the threat of same-sex couples kissing it was unimaginable how violent and visceral that was out there in America. With that, shall we go to the power breakfast?
Oh yeah, so as you can see, this is a close-up of the t-shirts that two of the people are wearing in the previous slide. And I have to give a shout out to Mary Patton, who's an artist and AIDS activist who first brought my attention to this imagery. And it was so rare at the time within the context of AIDS activism, but within visual culture at large, to see representations of lesbian sexuality. And so here's an image that is really working against this muting and sanitizing of lesbian desire, which we will talk a little bit more about in our next
in our next slide.
One more. I think we also have a slide of the lesbian censorship.
Oh, next, sorry. Okay. Things may be a little out of order, but nothing was done orderly. So this is fine. Just keep the power breakfast in your brain for a couple of slides. This is just real quick. Just another example of how threatening same-sex couples kissing look how cute that is. After we did Kissing Doesn't Kill, Gretchen Bender, really interesting artist who is no longer with us, was working at MTV for money. And MTV was doing these artist spots, 30 seconds at the top of the hour. And she suggested that Gran Fury do a spot, like turn the Kissing Doesn't Kill poster into live action. MTV loved the idea. They paid for us to make the spots. We had a filmmaker on staff, so to speak. And so we made these fabulous short videos. Christian Marclay did the music. They are so cute and so sweet and so rough if you see the animation today. But so we turned them into MTV and they didn't show them. They refused to show them. So we were censored from MTV in America. They did run on MTV in France and MTV in Brazil. And they showed one time on MTV at either 2 or 3 a.m., which I never saw. But it's like, look how cute those are. Really? Is it that scary? Okay, you can go to the next picture, please. And this is also from the first place that Kissing Doesn't Kill ran. I love this so much. I just don't even know what to say about it. But a lesbian activist group in San Francisco decided to censor as many of the posters as they could find by whiting out the other two couples and leaving only the lesbian couple, which given how invisible lesbians were, especially at that time, I was just thrilled.
You got to give it to them. Yeah. But, and, in response to the previous slide and, you're saying how cute they are, but, Michel Foucault said that the real threat of queerness to society isn't at all about queer sex. It's actually that people are coming to love each other. That's the real threat. Yeah. So I think that really speaks to that. So Kissing Doesn't Kill is one of the most well-known, if not the most well-known Gran Fury projects. But you actually engaged with the kissing theme before this project in 1988. You did a poster project titled the Read My Lips posters, of which we have a few slides actually.
Yeah, but
oh no,
I switched. Things got switched up.
Oh, hi, Lauren. Right. Oh, yes. I was going to say that there were a couple of lesbian activist collectives at the time who were advocating for lesbian visibility, including the Lesbian Avengers. And then we also have a slide of Fierce Pussy, founded in 1991 and still active. That's the following slide. And then we also have a slide of Dyke Action Machine, I believe also from 1991. That's the following slide. So that is just to say that these were some examples of, lesbian activist collectives. And there were more.
There were a lot more, but I just want to say, the reason I had placed the San Francisco censorship before the Lesbian Avengers was that, part of the reason, well, not part of the reason we were censored in San Francisco, but part of the reason we were censored in Chicago was that people were so scared we were recruiting their children. And then when I saw the Lesbian Avengers poster with "We recruit," it was just like, yes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. And then Fierce Pussy, that one was also interesting because it was so much about language,
Yes,
like
exactly.
use imagery.
Which your individual practice engaged with as well.
Yeah.
We will.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, you can go to the following slide. I can't believe we're already talking for 40 minutes. It's wild.
I know. We're gonna have to be like a little quicker. Anyway, this is in here for two reasons. One, I was also involved in WAC. I did those blue posters you see, the WAC is watching. I stole the eyeball illustration, and I'm not going to say any more about that. And the thing that's kind of interesting is the Lesbian Avengers, the Lesbian Avenger drummers then kind of morphed into the WAC drum corps, which was incredible. It was incredible. They were so good and so loud, and they just filled the streets. It was amazing. I've looked for recordings of it, and I just haven't been able to find them. Probably Ksenia could find them. Okay.
Yeah, I can find.
You can go on. It's just to show how many groups, how much graphics was going on, how we were speaking.
And I actually did have a question about that, because you must have, you were all running into each other at different meetings, and then people were, you were in several collectives. How were you navigating that? And were you sort of aware? Did you feel at the time that you had a grasp of, oh, these were the lesbian collectives that are, currently active? Or is it that in hindsight you would hear of, Fierce Pussy and you were like, oh, I never, do you remember seeing all these posters and at the time?
I mean, we knew, not that I knew every single person in every single group, but you definitely had colleagues in other groups, and not that you knew every single thing they were doing, but we were totally aware. And so we were speaking, but it wasn't like we were comparing notes, because there was also some competition, I have to say.
Totally.
Totally.
And then it happened that you were like out there wheat pasting your stuff, and then there was another collective wheat pasting their stuff.
Okay, that may be a Gran Fury, part of Gran Fury lore, but I just want to point out this problem that I was talking to Ksenia about before this started, is that the thing about Gran Fury is we were a conglomeration of 11 brains. And there were people there, some people were totally into treatment data. Some people were into visual communication. Some people were just into like fucking rioting. And so every body, literally every body had different information in their head that we then had to put together and make it all work. So if you interviewed all the Gran Fury members, you would get totally different stories from everybody. But what's really difficult is when you have to represent all of Gran Fury as one person, because you have to be on top of all that knowledge, but you don't really know all the knowledge. So it's a little tricky. Anyway, to read my
I will ask the other. Yes, so this is a 1988 project, Read My Lips, which was a reference to George W. Bush's presidential campaign, in which he said that there would be no new taxes, read my lips. And as you can see, this project also focused on the act of kissing between two queer couples, but so there was a male version and a girl version, a boys version and a girl version, and the boys version took its image from, as you will see in the next slide, you can go over to it now, from a very sexy image of two sailors making out with their erections exposed, and then the female version on the next slide depicted two flappers who were very platonically gazing at each other while one of them lifts the other's chin so that their eyes meet. And, the poster, for obvious reasons, did not sit well with the lesbian community and was really criticized for, as I mentioned before, really muting lesbian sexuality and diminishing it to the act of looking, Portrait of a Lady on Fire. And it also played into the stereotype of depicting lesbians in a domestic setting, while gay men were presented as adventurous and worldly. And actually, Richard Meyer, who's a queer art historian, has written about these posters, and he explained the origin of this image, which is from a very controversial play titled The Captive from 1926, and it was the first play on Broadway that took lesbianism as its subject. It did not have a happy ending, but there was a lesbian theme, and it prompted a nationwide censorship campaign. The police raided the play and arrested the producers and the cast, including the leading lady, Helen Menken. And they were released the next day, but the producers had to promise that they would close the play within a week. And then less than 2 months after the police raid, the New York State passed a law prohibiting the presentation of any theatrical work that depicted or dealt with the subject of sex degeneracy or sex perversion. And that law would be in place until 1967. And so knowing this background does make the image feel more urgent, but the queer audience in 1988 was not likely to have been familiar with that historical reference and cultural significance of the poster. So Marlene, can you talk a little? I know that you were very annoyed at the time. Yeah.
I was extremely annoyed, but I have to say, I wasn't yet a part of Gran Fury when these were made. And basically, the shit hit the fan. The thing is, if you were going to put ACT UP on your poster or whatever, you had to take it to a meeting and get a vote by the body of ACT UP that it was cool to do it. And basically, I think this first went up on the street, and then the Women's Caucus of ACT UP was like, what the fuck? I mean, Ksenia, thank you for that background. I didn't know that.
No, you must have known it.
To me, when I saw this, I'm like, are they in a fucking shoe store? What is she doing? Like trying on new shoes?
Yeah.
So there was a lot of discontent about the fact that the guys were represented so sexily and so vibrantly, and the women so chastely. And Gran Fury's excuse was, well, we went to the heresy archives and this is all we could find. So they went back. This is just lore because I wasn't there. They went back to the heresy archives, and you can go to the next picture.
Not the Her Story archives. It was the
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry.
Okay, I was like, Harry?
No, no, no.
Wonder.
Her Story. Sorry. And this is what they got.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a little better.
Yeah.
But still, it's like, has nothing.
Yeah.
It's so fucking nostalgic. It's so fucking
It's
still,
like a game of spin the bottom.
it, bleh. So anyway,
Yeah.
this is what was around for a while. And then I joined, and this became like my thing. I was like, this has got to change. But we were deep into the Kissing Doesn't Kill project, and it fell a little bit on the wayside. But you know, it's Ksenia touched all the boxes. I know we're short on time here, but it really is about this idea of like just lesbian sexuality, queer female sexuality, just being so not in conversation at that time. It was amazing. Okay, shall we move to the next one?
Yeah, I think we have because eventually you kept revisiting, right, the topic
Yes.
with Gran Fury.
Yes, yes.
And
finally we had
the image.
We had these
Yeah.
great images.
How did you recruit Julie Tolentino and Lola Flash for this image? What was
you
that?
know, they
what
were
was that?
actually really good friends with, I think they were really good friends with Tom Kalin. They were friends, really good friends with somebody in the group already. You know, it was this cross-fertilization that was going on. And pretty much everybody in that, in the MTV spots, that was just a very small selection. There were so many downtown artists you would recognize in there. It was just like everybody was kind of being sucked in different directions. So it wasn't a matter of having to beg and recruit.
Yeah, and these two, just to note, these two are both very important artists to advocating for lesbian visibility as well.
Yes, thank you. So we can go
and
on.
Then, yes, oh yes, we had this, we printed it, or you printed, I think I'm a member of Gran Fury now. You printed it afterwards. This was 89?
This was 89. Yes, it was 1989 at the St. Patrick's Cathedral, which was, I mean, it was a combo ACT UP and WHAM, Women's Health Action Mobilization group, shut down the mass. I should know who this person was. I would have to look it up because I can't remember. Took the sacrament, spit it on the ground, got carried out by like police from the sanctuary. It was a whole thing. But this is important in the legacy of Gran Fury because this is kind of what fueled us when we went to the Venice Biennale, was all of this interaction with the church.
The Venice Biennale. Here we go. I love that story.
Okay,
yeah, you can go to this. That was oh, here's another lesbian activist artist responding to, also working with you know, Read My Lips theme. And there is such an interesting revival in the 90s of cunt imagery, you know, after the 1970s. where you have feminist artists like Judy Chicago, you know, making quite a sensualist artwork around vaginal imagery. And then in the 90s, it's you know, it's approached from a more conceptual angle.
I think
And sorry, go ahead.
I couldn't hear you. You dropped out a little bit.
I was going to say, and it's something that you engage with in your work from a linguistic perspective, which I want to talk about.
Which is
as
why
well.
part of the reason just on that note, part of the reason I was dealing with language linguistics is because I did not want to be a part of that essentialist feminism. But I just wanted to say that the theme they're dealing with here in this Read My Lips is a gag order from George H.W. Bush. He basically put a gag order on any federal agency that offered prenatal care. And if they were to get funding from the federal government, they were not allowed to even mention the word abortion. This was made national. George Bush, the younger, George W. Bush, he made it global. But anyway, George Bush, the Supreme Court passed this rule. Clinton was elected in 1992 and disbanded it. And it has literally gone back and forth. Trump reinstated it and Biden took it away. So it's not gone. It just depends on who's in power as to whether federally funded clinics can mention the word abortion. But now with 22 states making abortion illegal, who knows where that's going? Okay.
Yeah, we need to bring.
And the reason the next slide is in here is because it was dealing with the same issue. This was an edition made in 1992 called Election Year Coffee. And it was also based on the Bush gag rule. So the text, Bush makes me gag. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. We can go to the next slide, yeah.
So these are the bloody handprints. On July 19th, 1988, the New York City Commissioner of Health, Stephen C. Joseph, he cut in half the estimated number of AIDS cases in New York City. This was devastating as it resulted in massive funding cuts. And of course, it created an outcry in the activist and medical communities. The first two bloody handprint posters were aimed at Joseph and the mayor of New York, Ed Koch. Basically, they had blood on their hands because people were going to die because they couldn't get medical care because there was no funding. Then you can go to the next image. Then Gran Fury, armed with rubber gloves and buckets of paint, put red. These posters were wheat pasted everywhere. And then as a sort of addition to that, these handprints appear everywhere downtown. I think we have another picture of this. One more. Yes. In October 1988, ACT UP targeted the FDA agency tasked with AIDS research. They staged a massive nationally coordinated demonstration. Over 1,000 activists shut the agency in a day-long siege. 180 people were arrested. But what the demonstrators were demanding was that the AIDS drug trials be speeded up so that we could get more drugs into more bodies faster. And after this demonstration, the trials were put were fast-tracked. And that was apparently the precedent to being able to get the COVID vaccine fast-tracked. But I can't tell you the details of all that policy. Do you have anything else to say, Ksenia? Because we could go on.
Well, it just makes me think, you know, how much paranoia there was at the time around queer blood. Basically, queer blood was equated with AIDS. And so even though, you know, there was this myth that lesbians couldn't get AIDS and women weren't even considered, you know, to be at risk, but at the same time, lesbians were urged not to donate blood during the AIDS crisis.
Correct.
So there's
Which ties right in with our next slide.
Wow, I'm impressed that you know which. Oh, yes, exactly. Yes, Gran Fury. So,
yeah.
Did you push for this poster, or what was your involvement?
A lot. The only part of this poster that I was never satisfied with, and this is the consensus problem, was the image in the background. But you know, you get to these points of like, is it better to get the message out there? Or is it better to?
So how were these decisions made? What came first, like the text or the image? How were you guys? Were you like, we must make a poster that says this, and then you were like,
I'll be honest with you, we had such heated discussions that people just start screaming out slogans and things, and I am not 100% sure, but I seem to remember grouchy old Michael Nesline. We were all like, was like, just screamed out, women don't get AIDS, they just die from it. And we were like, that's it. That's the text. So in this case, we started with the text. But it wasn't that all the time.
And then who had the idea for this image? Very odd. An odd juxtaposition.
We stock photography. We couldn't, I don't know, we didn't do a photo shoot. And a couple of Gran Furyites got it in their head that using this over-the-top beauty queen image would read better in Middle America, or to people outside of sort of the rhetoric of the moment, our rhetoric of the moment, people outside of that it would make more sense to them to implicate really status quo image than a radical image.
Like if they're at risk, it must be really bad. Whereas if you would like put like a leather dyke on it, it would be like, all right, well, we don't care about those.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like, you know, that was the rationale, which isn't without merit, but it always bothered me a little bit.
No, I get it now. I had never thought about that before. Gosh, I'm learning so much during this talk.
So am I. So anyway, just since you probably can't read that little type, I'm just going to tell you, this was basically posted on bus shelters all over New York. I mean, literally out in the outer boroughs everywhere, which was part of the thinking, right? So basically it's a call to the CDC to expand the definition of AIDS symptoms. 65% of HIV women were dying from chronic infections that did not fit the Center for Disease Control's definition of AIDS. Women were showing up at emergency rooms with pelvic inflamed pelvises, and everyone was being like, they have pelvic inflammatory disease, so here, take these antibiotics and go home. So they would go home and die. Because the CDC only based their definition of AIDS symptoms on the male body, females were just, as I said, 65% of women who got HIV were dying. So basically, I mean, eventually the CDC did change that definition, but that was our goal with this poster. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're already at an hour, Ksenia.
We have more time. We have at least 15 minutes more, and I really want to get to your work. But yeah, and it also just like exposes how in those days, you know, there was such the limited ways in which not just the government, but even within the queer community, you know, we were still thinking about the gender binary.
It
And
was
didn't have the language or the tools, you know, like how this must have been for, you know, trans people navigating sex and having to, you know, communicate with the healthcare system. Yeah, it's really, you know, I always say this to my students, it's really an epidemic that was allowed to happen.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah,
I didn't care.
You know, I think back at that Let the Record Show thing, I think the text of the picture I showed said something like, we've always hated homosexuals, but now we have a reason.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I want to talk about work, and I think that the next slide, I'm hoping that the next slide is
it's Venice
of your, because I want to hear no, we can, oh, the Venice, we can skip over. You did a project event.
Yeah, we'll go to,
there was penis and the Pope. It was not received. You were held at the Italian.
Yeah, we were threatened with jail.
Oh, and I remember you telling me that in that moment, you know, you were with the Gran Fury group and you were threatened with jail, and you were like, oh, all these boys are going to be in a cell with each other and I am going to be on my own.
In the women's jail. And
in Italy.
Linda Scherer, she was a curator at MoMA, but she had curated the Aperto section of the Venice Biennale. She was like, Marlene, if you get arrested, I'll come with you and I'll bring toilet paper. It's like, yes, Linda, thank you. Anyway, yeah, it was a whole thing. And we had to be judged by magistrates from Rome because they were afraid our work was heretical. Luckily, the magistrates decided it was not heretical. They said it's not very good art, but it's not heretical. So they let us hang it up. But
weren't you like, not art?
What?
Weren't you like, it's not art?
Yeah. Yes. But the important thing for Gran Fury was it got so much press. We had started out with the head of the Biennale being like, why are you here? We don't have AIDS in Italy. There is no audience for this. Go away. You know, long story short, there was, through all the antics, there was so much publicity about it that there were front cover articles on the local magazines and newspapers, national newspapers, about AIDS in Italy. And it talked about safe sex and, you know, it just got information out in the public that had not been out there. So
yeah,
we were very happy about that. Okay, you can go.
All right,
next one.
Over to your work.
Well, no, you just got to go fast through the next two.
You got to go until we get to Marlene. I love this photo. Yeah, we can skip over this. Here's an example of how, you know, general idea appropriated Robert Indiana, then you guys appropriated general idea, and
then I appropriated Gran Fury.
Riot, and then you appropriated Gran Fury's Riot, and let's go to the next, and one more. So here's an example of the different versions of Riot, because of course, you know, Stonewall was a riot. wasn't a party, it was a riot. And we forget that before the celebration, there was a riot. And so then you made your fuck painting, which is heat transfer on canvas. So let's talk about that. And you can go to the next slide for details. So this entire time you're involved with Gran Fury, you're working at a design firm, but you also have your individual studio practice. So how was your practice both informed by your work with Gran Fury, but at the same time, how did it move away from it?
Well, yes, it was very informed by Gran Fury, because I think one of our biggest conversations was about who speaks for whom. And we spent a lot of time talking about what does it mean for a marginalized community to speak for themselves and to say what they want to say and not say what somebody else wants them to say. So that was very much in my head all the time. By the time I had done fuck, I had already done, is it the next slide? Yeah, I had already done the next picture, Pussy Beaver Cunt. That was in 89. And, you know, I was thinking a lot about the invisibility of female sexuality in general, not just lesbian identified females, but, and then I, you know, I mean, literally in those days, men would say anything to you on the street. I mean, it was unbelievable. So that was in my head in one way. And then in the other way, it was, I think in a way, I was influenced by Barbara Kruger, Jenny Holzer, these women working with text instead of imagery. And I was feeling very itchy about the sort of essentialist feminist of the 70s, or feminism of the 70s. Also, I think there was a lot of work going on that was sort of about reclaiming language that's meant to hurt, and actually claiming that, like dyke, fag, queer, whatever. Hi, Will. And I just have to say, these are not done with computer. These were cut by hand. We didn't have computers at that point. And I, you know, sometimes you just think about something so often that you're like, I had been working with blank canvases. I'd been working with this idea of like, you have to realize at this point in time, the art world, okay, we did have Jenny Hilton, we had Barbara Kruger, we had Cindy Sherman, we had that sort of pictures generation, but the powerhouse of the art world, the gallery system, the museum system, was white men. I mean, we still think there's a lot of issues to deal with, and there are, but it was unbelievable in the 80s. And I was just like, in this case, I was thinking a lot about like, what does it mean to bring a female voice, a really powerful female voice, into the contemplative world of an art gallery? And so I did this, and all hell broke loose.
And how, no, because, you know, working with Gran Fury, there was the juxtaposing of image and text. And then you decided to just focus on text.
Well, you know,
in a lot.
I was doing a lot of image and text because I was doing Gran Fury. I was working with WAC. Well, not at that point. I hadn't started working with WAC. I was working at M & Company. And I don't know. I was reading a lot of Lutz Irigaray, whose name I have never learned to pronounce properly. And her idea of language, the idea that like actually all language is homosocial, because it's formed by this male patriarchy. And then her whole, you know, she had this whole crazy theory of like women's language would be really different because their biology is different, very essentialist. Their biology is different. The rubbing of the labia is a whole different feeling of being in the world than a male with his balls and penis. I mean, you know, it was French post-structuralism. She had studied with Lacan, so, you know, I mean, Foucault. And yeah, I was just like, I'm gonna call a spade a spade. So is this,
and you would often,
go ahead.
and you would often, I think we can see this more in the next few works that we have, but you would pluck phrases from car magazines and like tattoo catalogs, and once you isolated the language, it really exposed the ways in which, you know, women's bodies were fragmented and discussed as car parts, while men were compared to weapons and, you know, to tools of power.
Exactly. Machinery.
Go to the next slide. There's
yes.
Oh yeah, this was probably my favorite word.
I like this one a lot too. And this, I mean, all of this text work is found text, especially this earlier stuff. It's all found. Like that was part of a Metro Pictures installation where there were 30 some contiguous paintings that just went around the whole wall of the gallery. And those were all found texts. That was from, I think, an automobile magazine. You know, there were all these magazines aimed for men. And I was like, wow, that takes on a really different meaning if I say that.
Yeah. I think it's also might have been on t-shirts, and I can just see a dude wearing a t-shirt.
Possibly, I don't know. But it was really playing with this language of power and what happens when that is put into a different context, when it's comes through a different voice, when also it was like, you know, I guess in a weird way, a lot of the work is, this early work especially, not so much later, is a kind of posturing, you know. We were coming from art schools where male painters were telling everybody to paint with their penis. And that was okay that they said that. And it was just like, how do you counteract this a little bit?
And also it seems to me that it's, you know, it's a real move on your part to not do a painting, but actually this is all fabric, this is all heat transfer on canvas, and instead of, you know, even though you worked with Xerox in preparing these, like you're not you're working with an iron, and
they're all ironed. Even the gigantic ones are ironed.
Which, you know, you're literally burning.
Well, it was literally women's work, you know.
Yeah, and reclaiming that as well. And women's work is thought of as something that is soft and craft, and here you are with this iron.
And
that is, you know,
right?
Yeah.
It was really not about, it was really about not playing into that diminutive moment, I guess.
My computer is about to die, so I'm gonna plug it in. But if we go to the next slide, project, yeah. Will you talk a little bit about this?
Yep. This I was talking to Ksenia, I think it was 1990 or 91. I did an installation at White Columns called Bend Over, I'll Drive. And I did a whole series of ironed on bumper sticker paintings. And in addition to the paintings, I had these giveaways that people could just take with them. So I had a bumper sticker that said, "Pray for RU 486." These actually were, at this point, these were not fully found texts. They were texts. I started with bumper sticker text, and then I sort of made my own variations on them. So this is not completely found text. This is a piece that I am kind of proud of, because it was done, like I say, in 1990, I think. It was 1990, I'm sure of that. And it had a lot of resonance. You know, the government and the church and the medical industry were exerting a lot of power on people's bodies, who's accepted, who's invisible, who gets access, who doesn't get access. You know, who owns your body? Is it the church? Is it the fetus inside you? Is it modern technology? Just a lot of questions about the autonomy of your own body. And in a way, I'm very proud that this bumper sticker, which is like 30 some years old, is still being kind of recognized as having resonance. You can go to the next slide. It was just reprinted. Yeah, go ahead.
Didn't you tell me that you had it, that recently you had an experience where you had the bumper sticker and somebody like vandalized your car?
They didn't vandalize my car. They tried to run me off the road in West Virginia.
Oh, well, in that
case. Trucker, I had it on my car. I have whatever. I had it. This was my car. I had it on my car, and I was driving to Kentucky at Thanksgiving. And as I was entering the interstate, truck tried to run me off the road. He then got in front of me because luckily there was enough room I could veer off. Then I was on the interstate behind him. Okay, they have like a 70-mile-an-hour speed limit. He was going like 50 miles an hour. And every time I would try to pass him, he would like scoot out in the road. So I just stayed behind him, creeping along at like 50 miles an hour on this crazy interstate. And when we got to the next overpass, I just slowed down and let him go ahead and got off and just waited for half an hour until he was hopefully outside. But I scraped the bumper sticker off at that rest stop. I was so freaked out.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I mean, that...
so it gets under people's skin.
Yeah, still,
yeah.
And
also, oh, I feel so bad. I meant to look up their proper name. Body Positive for All. Bodies Positive for All. They just reprinted it as part of their campaign to raise money for a truck of art that's going to go around America about trans bodies, actually.
And I know we're running out of time, but I at least want to get to, can you go to the slide that is, that says I fucked Madonna? Oh, there we go. Here it is.
No, the previous one, please.
Go back. Yeah, exactly. Because I think that this work to me which ends up being in your next show, with your second show with Metro Pictures. But to me, this work is such a clever nod to, the lesbian chic phenomenon that would really fully culminate in 1993, when the New York Times or the New York Magazine coined the term and lesbian chic and featured Katie Lang on the cover. And, it was supposedly, it was signaling an increased visibility of lesbians, right, in mainstream media, entertainment industry, and even in politics. And suddenly the fashion styles of lesbian subcultures were trendy. Madonna was supposedly having a romance with Katie Lang, which was later, admitted to have been a publicity stunt. And Bill Clinton appointed a lesbian as I think assistant secretary of housing and urban development. Yeah, Roberta Achtenberg. Anyway, but it was just like a commodification and aestheticization of lesbian culture, and did not actually come with any increased rights, right? Which just shows that visibility doesn't necessarily result in rights. And it was really like a way of trivializing and depoliticizing lesbian identity, and kind of blending it into a heteronormative world, and making it was like, by making it more visible, it was actually making it invisible. Tell me.
Yeah, no, but you're right. You're right. I was thinking about by making it more visible, it was making it invisible. I mean, that's kind of the way, truthfully, this is not going to be very popular, but that's kind of the way I feel about gay marriage.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Because, it's like my partner and I are not married. I'm not saying that's the right decision, but
Yeah.
we spent and we have a child together. We spent so many years like figuring out how to protect ourselves as a family, blah, 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 when there were no immediate rights for our constellation. And, everything you did felt like, this is so radical and so invasive of the status quo. But then a lot of these things, rights have come about, which is great. And I'm not saying they shouldn't be here, but I just feel like the fallout of it has been that the vast majority of straight people are like, oh, now they're just like us. And
yeah.
I don't want to be just like them.
No, I just pulled up a quote that I have in my dissertation that might be a nice note to end on, but it's in Out magazine from 1993. It was right after Pride. A writer named Donna Minkowitz described her disappointment with the 1993 Pride March and referred to it as a queer Yosemite. And she writes, the new agenda was to get lesbians and gay men as large a piece of pie as possible, not to criticize the pie's ingredients, bake a new one, or discuss who wasn't getting any pie at all and dying of starvation. God forbid we should have different ideas about sexuality, gender roles, relationships, and the family, not to mention innovative, different, or radical ways of leading our lives. And God forbid we should have any special needs or demands around the issues of AIDS or healthcare. At the march, AIDS barely existed as a subject.
Yeah.
So I think that really speaks to how many people in the queer community were experiencing this moment in 1993 and still, of course.
Yep.
I can't believe we have run out of time. We have much more, but I think that maybe
Well, we
this
gave
is
a
a
little
good
bit
note.
of a quick overview.
We must do part 2 because there's so much more of your work that we can speak about.
I 100% agree. We absolutely have to do a part 2. This was so informative and so engaging. And I can't believe that we ran out of the entire time without getting to any of the questions. I do want to make time for a couple of questions, should folks have them. I am a little concerned that Zoom might cut us off right at the 90-minute mark, in which case we will have an extended Q&A when we do our part 2 of this program. But before we went live on this program, Marlene, you were talking a little bit about how you recently participated in a Gran Fury exhibition, and how it still continues to resonate with young folks and young activists on the ground. I'm just wondering if you both could share like very briefly about why you sort of think that is, and why this work like continues to resonate with folks.
You're asking me that, or
Both.
everybody else?
Both, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, as I said to you, I didn't expect it to resonate that that intensely with a much younger generation. Part of me wonders a little bit, is it the sort of simplicity of the work? You know, I didn't have to be a part of a corporation. I didn't have to have a big branding firm. I didn't have to be sure I would get 1 million hits before I could do something. We just did it, and it either worked or didn't work. So I think that kind of freedom maybe has some appeal. I don't know. What do you think, Ksenia? You're younger than I am.
You know, I mean, the way in which during the AIDS crisis, artists joined forces, activists joined forces, gay men and lesbians and others, you know, on the gender spectrum, even though we had different terms for it then, joined forces in a way that did not happen during Stonewall. You know, things were still very divided. It was really the AIDS crisis, and actually achieved change, and did so largely through visual culture. I mean, it was unprecedented, and it set an example for generations to come. You know, and the sense of community. Yeah, I think it's incredible.
Thank you
Any
both.
other ideas? Why? No.
Well, I think it sort of goes back to what you were saying earlier, right? That in like our post-2016 political environment, this work feels all the more urgent and important in the way that it certainly must have felt in the 80s and 90s. But that's just one person's guess.
And the 90s are coming back, not just in fashion, also in, you know, how
Fashion.
queer people
State of being.
Yeah. I know that we're over time, but we do have one other question, if you don't mind, if I can impose briefly. The typography in your work, Marlene, is so unique and beautiful. What was your process for developing the type, or were you using pre-existing typefaces and working off of them?
It depends on what you're looking at. In the, you know, I may go down on your sister. I mean, I may not go down in history. I may go down on your little sister. That I started with at that point in time, we didn't have a computer. We couldn't make type. We couldn't set type. We had to call someone, tell them what size, what typeface. They had to set it. So I had, that was an existing typeface that we did have a Xerox machine, which could distort things. I know that was pretty radical at the moment. And so I would order regular type from the typographer, and then I would hand alter that manuscript, and Xerox it to kind of make it longer. I put the stripes through the typography. I did all that. The flamey type, that's all just hand drawn. That wasn't typeset or following any existing typography. All the blocky text, like the Pussy Beaver Cunt, that was hand cut out of Ruby Lith, which probably nobody knows what that is, but that's okay. And then Xeroxed, and then I had to re-Xerox it to make it backwards. And then I'd Xerox it onto the plastic substrate. I'm probably going to die of lung cancer. And then iron that onto the fabric. So it was all handmade one way or another. You couldn't just sit down in front of a computer and be like, oh, okay. Oh, that looks cool. Oh, that looks cool. You had to order things. You had to have a vision in your head before you did the typography. Does that help?
Yeah, definitely. I think that they were just very interested in your process. Yeah. I'm sure that there are many, many more questions that we'd love to get into, but I don't want to impose on your time too much, and would love to have you both back to do a part 2 for this because it was so incredibly informative and we didn't even get through all of your slides. But Ksenia, Marlene, thank you so much for joining us today. This was really incredible, and I know that I learned so much, and I'm sure that our attendees did too.
I learned stuff too. I love that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Yes, thank you.
Thank you for having me, Ksenia. Thank you for inviting me. Always great to hunker down with you.
Likewise, truly.
Absolutely.
Can't
Thank
wait
you
for the
both.
next one.
Yes, thank you both so much. I'm really excited for the next one. And I hope everybody enjoys the end of Pride.
Yes.
All
I'm
right.
like, Kenneth, hurry up.
I know, I'm
Right.
exhausted. All right, thanks everyone.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.